Hello and welcome. We are talking about iteration. So we'll talk a little bit about um, data structures that one might iterate over, and we'll talk about what the myriad options that we have for iterating over things in Dribble script. So let's make some objectives. So by the end of this lesson, I hope that each and every one of you will be able to recall at least, let's say 5 ways to iterate in JS. And I hope that you will be able to solve problems using iteration. All right, before I dig in any further, hit me with some questions. What have been your burning questions about iteration so far? And I'll see if I can't sneak those in too.
The hardest part for me is how do you read it in like plain words, you know?
Love it. That's a great one. Give me more. More.
I guess the hardest part for me has been when I'm trying to use it, trying to figure out, I don't even know how to put it, how to figure out how to arrange it so that it returns the value that we're seeking, you know?
Sure. That's a good one too, and it's super different with like all the different ways we can do this. Very nice. Um, cool. Other questions?
I just like to see it visualized. And I think that's the hardest part for me is I can see the letters, see what they're saying, but it's not clicking.
Beautiful. That's really helpful. Um, anything else? All right. Let's dig in. Start with the first objective, recalling at least 5 ways to iterate in JS. So let me get a baseline on this. Head over to inbox if you'd be so kind. All right, questions out. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. What ways to iterate can you think of right now? All right, pencils down. Send me what you got. All right, looking through the responses. Four. It's pretty good. There's also some variance on that. For in and for of. I'm also seeing while on here. In like product development kind of programming, we don't tend to use while a ton. We're going to talk about while more in the third unit, along with its cousin do while. While is like the lowest level looping construct. That's what like all those layers of translation down in your computer, the last thing that's looping is doing while loops. For loops, all that stuff is like abstractions on top of that. We got do while. And let's see, what else? A couple of you have picked up on for each. That's iteration also. Looks very different. It uses functions instead of control structures like the rest of this. Still iteration though. Same with filter. Same with map. Yeah, find iterates.
I mean, does it just think about find though? But find stops when it hits the first one that matches, right?
Totally. You can also do that with all the other kinds of loops.
Okay.
You do that with break and continue to get out of an iteration, but it's still programmatically looking through a list of things.
Okay.
Good. Awesome. All right, we're actually in pretty good shape on this. All of these are tools for accomplishing one of those three things that like a programming language has to take care of. So sequence, controlling the order that things go in. Selection, figuring out which things go and which things don't. All of this is iteration. Doing something more than once. Looking through a list of data, that kind of thing. So I saw quite a few people put if on there. If is not an iteration construct. If is a conditional construct. So if I drew this out like a flow chart, these end up being different things. So the flow chart, we have a start, and we go down, and then we have like processes in the flow chart. So that's sequence. Flows down through here. And then at some point in the flow chart, you get a conditional. So that means if something is true, go that way. If something is false, go that way. Those are if statements and switch statements. Anything that like picks which of like some amount of alternatives to do. That's how you represent that. So then each of these can have other processes. Each of those can have their own conditionals. So if that's false, it goes to here. If that's true, it goes to here. If that's false, it goes to here. That's true, it goes here. Okay, so that's conditional logic. And these could even like combine back up. And also, you can do things like have a process, and if check a condition, and if the condition is false, go back around. That's a loop. And then once it's true, it ends up here. But this idea that this process acts on something, and then if it's false, it does it again. And if it's false, it does it again until it becomes true, and then it keeps going. All loops at some level kind of look like that. That's the idea of looping. So that's as abstract as we could possibly make it. Now let's make it as concrete as we can possibly make it. Nope. Projects, practice. All right, so if I have an array with 3 things in it, and I iterate over the array. So I say like let element of some array, and then I log everything in the array. Okay, so that's with the looping construct. All that does is the following. This and this are the exact same code. So other than like the fact that the for loop is way less lines, what advantage can you think of for why the looping construct is helpful?
Well, here you only have an array of 3 items. If it was like, say, 100 or 1,000, it'd be a real pain in the ass to write.
No kidding, right? Because if I add D to this array, then I also need to do that. I don't need to do anything for this. Nothing changes. I add another element to that array. I gotta keep writing more statements. This stays exactly the same. So if I run this, oops, something I didn't like. It's because it's not called array. Come on, Coverly. It's called oh, all right, fine. Oh shit, I just thought of another way I could do that. Never mind, whatever. Okay, so if I run that, exact same output. That code doesn't change when the list gets longer. That code does. Abstract. Do something. Am I done yet? 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 I'm done. Concrete. That's the short. That's the long. Ask me some questions about that.
If you perform a push later on, does it still print it out using the for loop? So on line 21, we do a push to some array.
Sure. Push F
And that's
to pay respects. So who can answer that? What happens? Does it change anything about the loop?
It doesn't because it comes later in the code.
Sequence. This all goes top to bottom. I declare an array. I do this loop. The loop is over. I log this thing. I do all the same things. Then I push something into the array. Now, I could do the loop again. Now it's going to show that F the second time. Good question. What else?
Do you have to define element in there? Could you just do for element of some array?
You could, and JavaScript will generally allow it. You should not, though. That does not do exactly what you think it does. So remember our scoping rules, which... Okay, so we've got boxes inside of boxes inside of boxes. Outside can see inside, inside cannot see outside. And like, that's basic sanity with scope. So we've got an A out here, and then B in here, and then a C in there, and then a D here. A can't see B, A can't see C, B can see A, B can't see C, C can see B, C can't see D, D can see A. That is our like variable scoping review. Any questions about that so far? So you'll also remember that const and let are block scope, so all these boxes are blocks. If we leave off the scoping thing, const or let, and just do nothing, what happens is that gets yanked all the way out here. It makes it a global variable, which is never what you want to do. If you wanted to do that, you would declare C here and then assign it in here. Leaving the thing off entirely just throws it in the global scope. That is probably the single biggest design mistake in JavaScript. Brendan Eich, the guy who wrote JavaScript, has publicly apologized for it pretty much his entire career. But if we leave this off, that'll work. It starts polluting our scope. Because with that let in there, element is only available inside of this block. That's what we want. It's why I was able to redeclare it out here.
Kyle, I have kind of a a dumber question, but just looking at this, it got me thinking. So obviously, we're starting off with the const sum array, and then it's got all of our items listed that are going to be in the array. What happens if we start moving up to like a lot bigger numbers? Like, is there a faster way than to having to type all of those out, you know, as opposed to typing out 100 things that are in the array? Is there a faster way to push them all into the array or something like that?
Like in real life, you're pretty rarely doing something like this. You're either getting it from a file or you're getting it over a network, like from a
Okay.
database or something. Now, on the other hand, like somebody needs to get that stuff in there. So like the database stuff, like for example, your performances and your evaluations, all of that stuff is automated. So like I don't go, Bryce made a submission and then like type it into the database. I do that with your curriculum though. So like if yeah, I have it up right now because I just added that concepts thing from this morning. I wrote every stupid line of this thing. I did it over a long time. I didn't do it like in one sitting. But arrays and objects and arrays and objects and strings and strings and strings and strings. And so every time I add something new to the curriculum, I got to add an object to the array and then add it to one of these big old lists. Now, like, this is in one file, and then how that gets turned into your curriculum is a script that I wrote. It goes like that. It reads that file, it goes and finds all the markdown files and stuff and jams them all together, and then writes that, and then the application ends up using that. So that's where that data tends to come from. Either you write a big ass configuration file like I did, or it's all in a database and then like there. This is the code that like pulls stuff out of the database or getting all of your different performances. That's the code that does that. Goes into the database, give me everything where it's either everything if it's a coach or everything that has your email on it otherwise, and then sends that back down to you. Good question.
Okay, so the for, this is a for of loop, right? So like what's the difference in how you would read this as a human, like how you would interpret this as opposed to like a for in or just a for loop? So I know like you're looking at sum array, which is that array that you defined above. You yourself have defined element. Is that considered a parameter because you're throwing it back into console log?
It is an argument to console log, but don't mix it up. Just because for loops and functions both use blocks, they don't share terminology. They're different kinds of things. A for loop is a control structure, function's a function. So compared to the other kinds of loops, I'm going to rewrite this exact same loop 2 different ways.
Okay.
Actually, one more bonus one. All of these are the exact same thing.
You know what's crazy is that last one is the one that makes the most sense. Maybe because it has the most, I guess, meat and potatoes to it, but I feel like that one is so clear and the rest are really, really abstract.
Sure. So there's a name for that. Down here, this stuff is called imperative. Up here, this is called declarative. Declarative is, I am saying the thing that I want. Computer figures out how to get it for me. Imperative is, I'm telling the computer what to do. We could even go even more declarative than that. The really declarative way to do this would be for each element in some array, log it. Now, the reason that across the board declarative code is better than imperative code, there's basically nowhere I can make a mistake in that. I can't fat finger something. I can't get the operators wrong. And all of the code involved with this is bulletproof. There's no off by one errors with something like this. Compare that to a for loop where I wrote a whole diagram about what a tragedy this is. Head over to this. This is where all of your images come from, or hosted from, by the way. Shoot, stop it, stop it. All right, this is the problem with for loops. The stuff in red is every place you can make a mistake while you're writing a for loop. It's a minefield. I've been writing for loops my whole life. I still screw them up when I write them. That's why we tend to prefer stuff like this over stuff like this. Now, we also get a little bit more limited in what we can do the higher up that we go. What if I want to log every third number or third index? What if I only want to, I don't know, I just need some more tweaky level of control? Imperative code gives you that. It's also like harder to do correctly than it is wrong.
Yeah, and I experienced plenty of that on the exercises from today.
Yeah.
A lot of returned empty arrays from when I was trying to filter and find. So yeah, I definitely see how imperative it's more prone to errors as opposed to declarative. I just have to clear that fog on how to read declarative statements.
Yes. Also, just sanity checking. Oops, something I didn't like. Oh, it's because it's not I. See, this is what I'm talking about, man. I called it index here, but I called it I here. Oh, interesting. I know why it did this. It's a thing called capping. If you just pass that in, I may have mentioned to you guys that You can also give these more arguments. Like if you did want the index, like index is passed as a second parameter. When you do this, you're still getting it. You're just ignoring it and like not using it, which is fine almost all the time. So if you pass console.login, it just ends up giving you all three things that end up getting passed to those functions. And it looks like that. But yeah, there's the actual element, the index, and then it gets a third argument too, which is the entire array.
Okay, so that also explains when I was Googling it why sometimes, like I was trying to look up, how to essentially filter an array by its index, and I saw a lot of exactly what you're talking about. Like they would put in parentheses 3 items: the something, I think the element, index, and array. I was like,
Correct.
I don't even know what that's referring to, but now that you just kind of alluded to it, so that makes
Yeah.
sense.
There you go.
And so if we omit those,
Mm-hmm.
that's fine, right? Like if we
Totally
omit 2 of
fine.
them or 1 of them. Okay.
Now, it's sloppy to put a parameter in there and then not use it, so it's better to just leave it off. But like this code doesn't break or anything. Other questions about loops? Cool. I am going to throw out the same question in inbox that I did earlier. All right, let's see how we do this time. Oh, but no peeking. What are all the ways to iterate that you can think of? Go. Oh no, this free water bottle.
Yeah, that's.
Finding that it's maker.
Duncan said he smashed it. Okay?
See. Beautiful. Keep them coming. All right, that is a set of 100% correct answers. So I'm going to call that a big-ass victory. So everybody can recall 5 different ways to iterate in DribbleScript. All right, so now we want to solve problems using iteration. None of the stuff that we do in this part of the program should require anything other than the applicatives, like for each, map, fine, whatever, and for of. And the third unit, we're going to do a little bit of for in and probably a little bit of while and do while and regular for loops and stuff. But for right now, we should be just fine with a smaller toolbox. And also, it's like the same toolbox that you use for like most real stuff. I can't even recall having ever written a do while loop in something that wasn't trying to just teach me how do while loops work. Even while loops in like application programming, they're pretty rare. They're a little bit more common in game development. But regular application stuff, like it's one of my like internal signs that like if one of the applicative functions isn't working, I'm either doing something weird or I'm just thinking about the problem wrong. Because most of the time we can get what we need out of the other ones. So let's do let's start with like a pretty easy one. Just a transformation. A really common iterative thing that we do is we have an array of objects and we need to pull a property out of each of them. That is like stuff you do all damn day long. So let's say that I have something like assignments. And assignments is equal to, it's got an ID, it's got a title, and it's got a number of points. If you haven't been able to tell yet, I don't care too much for grades and points, but we're working for a bad school that does lots of grades and points. So this one's worth 20, which means it's exactly a third as valuable. I call that kind of thing math laundering. You take something that's inherently like mushy and subjective and you turn it into math so you can pretend like your garbage input wasn't like quite as squishy or subjective as you thought it was. All right, so here's our underlying data. I am going to throw out an inbox. Write me. Why is my mouse being weird? my mouse is being strange. All right, let me try that. There we go. Okay, so question is, write a mapping function that turns this into an array of titles. Question is posted. Let's see what you got. back in mouse business. Keep them coming. I use a trackball. And if you've never used a trackball before, the primary feature of trackballs is that your hands make them disgusting. And they gunk up the sensors and stuff. And so then you have to clean them fairly often. Other than that, they're wonderful. And super ergonomic, but they are gross. Couple more. Cool, excellent. So, generally pretty good on this. The correct answer is, you can do like titles, assignments. Okay, so this is a thing that like I saw a couple times that like makes me anxious. What should the parameter for this function I'm about to pass in be called?
Singular
Assignment.
now.
Yeah, it should be a
Assignment
singular.
should be the singular. Don't get clever with it. Don't call it title. Like, don't get weird with it. We are iterating over each of the assignments, so that's an assignment. And like, that will save you no end of heartache just naming these things correctly. Because what will happen is you call that a title, and then you end up doing something weird like title.title. And then you're down in that function, you're working with it, and you're like, I don't know why I can't get the length of it. It's the title. Well, it's not the title, it's the object. Plural, singular. That rule alone will save you so much heartache. Cool. That's the right answer. I saw some people do it a little bit extra. Like, for example, logging it. That's fine. That'll like get it on the screen. But that's not like a requirement that we do that or anything. That's not part of it. That's just, oh, if we'd like to see all of those, well, then we could log that. Sure, that's fine. Same thing with like logging the titles. The reason that it like makes me a little anxious is I didn't ask you to do that. And about half of you did it anyway. Which makes me think that maybe part of your mental model of how this works is that you have to console log things like to make them go or something. And that's not the case.
Speaking purely personally, because the Beyonce one I ever had us print or return everything,
Yeah.
that was all it was coming from for me. It was just the muscle memory.
Cool. Yeah, also didn't need to go in a function or anything like that. Like, you can. That doesn't hurt anything to do it that way. But just so our mental models are clear on that. All right, so that's how you'd pull a property out of a list of objects. Now, I'm going to give you a slightly harder one. I want you to calculate a mean average, like add them all up and divide them by how many of them there are, of the points in assignments. So there's going to have to be a couple steps to this. You're going to want to get the points. You're going to want to add them together. And then you need to divide them by some number. Who knows? So that's your challenge. Let me write it out real quick. I'm going to say calculate, write a function. Yeah, let's do it that way. Write a function that accepts a list of assignments and returns the mean average of their points. A lot of different ways you can do this. All of them are right. You can do it as like one cool functional chain. You can do it as like mixing and matching, declarative and imperative stuff. All those are fine. Let's see what you got. Go for it.
Daddy, can I have a cheese sandwich?
Sure. Let's take another 2 minutes. No 30 seconds. All right. So pencils down. Even if like you didn't get it done, submit something. Gives me data to go off of. All right, and then talking through the things that I am seeing, I'm seeing a lot of solid thinking on this. I think the only person who got it all the way right was, but a big round of applause for John Lake. Well done. Like most people were pretty close though. So let's go through it together. Write a function. So we can start by saying function that accepts a list of assignments. So we don't know what the name of it's going to be yet, but we do know that it accepts a list of assignments and returns the mean average of their points. So something called average. So we could call this get average. How about? So all right. So that's our starter. And we're trying to get the mean average. So this list here, we really need like all of those points, and we're trying to add those together. So a couple different ways we could do this. We could start by just trying to get all of their points like that. Same way we did on the other one. About half of you picked up on, well, actually, let me do the sum first. So a few different ways we could do the sum. My heart soared seeing so much reducing going on. So we could take points. So right now, points is an array with 60, 20, and 80 in it. If I want to sum those together, that's like the classic reduce. So I could reduce it. Reduce takes a function and a starting value. So anytime you're summing something, it's going to be 0. And then that'll be the sum. This will be the number. And we want to return the sum plus the number. Okay, so that sums those together. The thing that not a lot of people picked up on, though, about half of you, I'd say, is that, all right, so we want the sum divided by how many assignments there were. That's how many assignments there were. We don't actually need to go through a more complicated way to get the number of assignments. The length of the array is the number of assignments. And then we return the average. All right, so let's see if it works. If I log get average and I pass assignments into it, let's see what I get. Ta-da! There's that awesome floating point math. So ways that I can clean this up. I've talked with a couple of you about this already. anytime you see that, you save something in a variable and then immediately return it. Well, that's the same thing. We don't actually change anything about the code by doing that other than making it clearer. All right. So this sum takes the points, and we go through that whole thing to get the points. Do I actually need to save that in a variable first? If points and this thing are the same thing, which they are because that's what assigning something does, then that means any place I'm using points, I can use that thing that I just assigned. So how about I get rid of that and yank that out and throw it over there. And so now I can start to make this look like a chain. That's pretty good. Let's see, can I take that even farther? So if sum and this long thing are the same thing, well, I guess I could probably do divided by assignments dot length there, and then just return this whole thing. But moment of truth, does it work? Ta-da! Now, I think it's a fair question. Is that actually like better code than that? I don't know. I could go either way on that one. This is probably a little bit easier to follow than that is. I tend to lean a little bit farther in this side when I'm writing code myself. And then somebody goes, the way you wrote it's too confusing. And then I sort of get browbeaten into doing it that way instead. But I don't put up too much of a fight.
So, like, this is pretty much the exact Beyonce question I was stuck on. And I was trying to figure out a way of pulling information from the function that we previously did and kind of like doing that. Is it better just to do it all contained within the question? Or is there a way to pull in a function, like the result of a function, you know, I don't even know what I'm trying to ask at this point.
No,
But
absolutely.
That's
Okay.
exactly what I did, Brad. I just called the function.
You're supposed to.
Yeah.
It's so much harder to do Beyonce if you write the logic from scratch every single time for every single thing in there. Give yourself some helper functions, man. So, like, even these functions in here, I could write a function called getPoints that takes in an assignment and come on, man, and returns assignment.points. Well, hey, guess what? That's exactly the same thing as what's happening in this map. So I can just do that instead. Or I could write a function called sum that takes in a starting value and a number and returns starting value plus number. Well, hey, isn't that exactly what's happening inside of this reduce? Why, yes, it is. So I could say, ta-da. So yeah, like you can reference functions that are in your scope. You should. You know functions call functions.
Can you show a demonstration of how you're calling it to combine it?
Sure. So this is where applicative programming, especially when you're getting started, gets way like intellectual. You don't call getPoints. The mapper calls the function for you. So like that does not do what you think it does. If I do getPoints or like try to pass assignment into that, that gives me the result. That gives me like trying to evaluate that function. Map takes a function definition, Find takes a function definition. Filter takes a function definition, not an invocation. That's what gets kind of weird about that. But let's say there was something that I did want to like just call, like, for example, maybe something that gets the mean. So, so I have something that takes in a number and a count and then returns the number divided by the count. I could even put some like logic in there to justify this a little bit more. Like, for example, maybe I want to round down. So I call that math.floor, number divided by count. That gets rid of that gross floating point thing too. So then I could take this sum and then return the mean and then pass in sum and assignments.length instead. Does it still work? Yep. Cannot access sum before initialization. I don't believe I am. Oh, it's because I called it, I called this function sum, and I called this variable sum. All right, call that get sum. Get sum! All right, now let's try it. Ta-da! Though that looks like a different value. Maybe it, shoot, why did it do that? That's interesting. So I got the points, mapped that, called get sum, which took in a starting value and a number, returned the starting value plus the number. Oh, it's because I still have that assignments.length in there. All right, one more time. There we go, 53. Rounded down from that. Calling functions from all over the place. Questions? All right. Let's get everybody else back here. Let's review our objectives. Did pretty good on this. I'm going to give this 1 cross. We still got some work to do on iterative problem solving, but we're making progress. So, thus concludes the iteration lesson.